Random thoughts. The world owes Ethiopia more than it knows. Few nations have had as much impact on the world's culture, politics, and economy as Ethiopia has. Those that have impacted the global culture and politics and business mostly have done it through the threat of violence. Ethiopia did it through the berry. And I'm talking about coffee and how it has changed the world. It is generally understood that coffee was first consumed in Ethiopia, in a region called Kaffa, which is the name that coffee is called in most parts of the world, especially in the English-speaking world. And this is attributed to one shepherd, apparently, who was herding his sheep or goats or other animals. And then he realized that the animals were consuming this berry and their behavior was kind of like changing. And he tried it and he found it to be helping in some way, making him feel more energetic, for example. And he decided to take this berry home and he takes it to a monastery where it is thrown into the fire. And then the people realize that it is producing a certain effect on the people. And that's how apparently coffee started being consumed in Ethiopia. Now, at some point, it became such an important aspect of the life of the people who lived on the land we know today as Ethiopia. Uh, the Oromo soldiers, for example, are known to have carried with them some coffee because they will survive on only coffee for a very long time. It gave them strength and it made them to be alert and it made them not to need food that often. And that was helpful, of course, in the battlefield, especially when the battle went too long than it was hoped for. Now, apparently, coffee moved out of Ethiopia, and the first place it went to, or the first place where it was consumed out of Ethiopia, is Yemen. Now, in Yemen, initially it was used by religious people or people engaged in religious practices, and it kind of helped them in that regard. And it is said that that's where the concept of coffee houses was born. These people will meet to pray, of course, and then they will take coffee and have discussions about other things beside religion, of course. And then it became a culture basically. And this culture moved to what we can say the Middle East, the Levant region. People found it to be a very helpful way to socialize, meet, and take coffee and have conversations about different types of topics. And this culture moved to the Ottoman Empire. Of course, part of the Levant at that point was part of the Ottoman Empire. It went to Turkey, and then it went to the rest of Europe, where coffee houses by the 17th century became so common. It was places where sober people met, because up until that time, the only places, social gathering where people will easily meet and discuss issues was in taverns and bars and clubs and places like that where alcohol was served. But of course, with alcohol into the mix, of course, sometimes conversations don't become meaningful. But coffee was different. It provided that aspect of socializing, but at the same time, you remained sober and alert, and people would discuss different types of topics. Now, with this gathering, something else was happening. Because the more you let people share ideas, the more they become aware of situations, and the more they share ideas that could even be dangerous, we can say. And that's what happened, especially in Europe and in the Ottoman Empire. People started talking about different ideas that usually they would not, or in other settings they would not discuss, but they found it easy to discuss these topics in coffee houses. And that was a threat to the power, of course. In fact, in the Ottoman Empire, one sultan decreed that coffee drinkers should be put to death. That was Sultan Murad IV. And that was carried out, of course, to try to make people to stop meeting and having conversations or discussing what maybe he deemed to be very dangerous ideas. And the same thing happened in England. King Charles II started putting spies in coffee houses because there were very dangerous ideas, according to him, of course, that were being discussed in those spaces. And he wanted to know what the people were discussing in those spaces. And that was in the late 17th century when this was happening. Now, the reason why coffee houses became like a threat to power is because they provided something that was not common up until this moment, especially in England and many parts of Europe, because these were societies that were in stratas, like they were with a hierarchy of people belonging to different classes, of course. And it wasn't very common for people from different classes to meet and have conversations. It was only people from one class meeting and having conversation, another class meeting and having conversation separately. But now coffee houses became these places where a peasant could just walk in and sit next to a noble and have these conversations about politics and everything else. And in fact, in coffee houses, very major ideas came out of those places. In fact, some of the big names we know, for example, Voltaire, Rousseau, Isaac Newton, they are known to be people who frequented coffee houses, and they will share ideas with others about anything and everything, of course. And yeah, we can say some ideas were birthed in those coffee houses, or they came into clarity, yes, because as people discuss ideas, sometimes clarity sets in and these ideas crystallize. And even authors like Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre are known to have frequented coffee houses and having conversations with people and other authors or other writers and philosophers and all kinds of people. Now, the coffee houses also are places where things were plotted. And in fact, it is said that the French Revolution, to some extent, was discussed and maybe sometime planned in coffee houses. Some people meet there and discuss things on how to, of course, end the monarchy and change society and things like that. Such conversations happen in the coffee houses, and in some cases, like in the case of France, those ideas in the end reached a point where they changed society and they changed government. And the same thing happened in the US. During colonial times, some people meet and have conversations, and it is known that most of these people meet in coffee houses and discuss how they wanted to be free of the British rule. And of course, what follows was the Revolutionary War that ended the rule of Britain over the US. Now, at some point in the UK, coffee houses came to be known as penny universities. And that's very powerful for a reason. They were called penny universities because, one, you only needed to buy a cup of coffee for pennies, but out of that, you got a lot of knowledge. Everybody was there, professors and philosophers, authors and generals, everybody was there. And people take coffee and they talk and they share knowledge. So you went in, paid some pennies for a cup of coffee, and you left more knowledgeable than you went in. So they started being known as the penny universities. Now, another place where coffee contributed to a major change is the New York Stock Exchange. It's generally known that the New York Stock Exchange started as a gathering of stockbrokers under some tree. But then very quickly, this group of stockbrokers set up a coffee house. This happened so quickly, like 1 year after 1 year of meeting under the tree, they set up a coffee house that came to be known as the Tontine Coffee House. And they will meet here to, of course, share information about the market and sometimes even do some trading, of course. Now, today, billions of cups of coffee are consumed every day. If you are going to believe some data, they say over 2 billion of cups of coffee are consumed worldwide. I suspect it could be more than that. And today we talk of coffee dates, we talk of having a conversation about a business over a cup of coffee and things like that. And people have coffee in the morning before they do anything. Some people have a coffee during the day. And some people even have a cup of coffee late in the evening, which of course is not ideal, but people do what they do, and if they like it, they do it. And today we have major brands globally that almost everybody will recognize. Starbucks, Nescafe, and brands like that. And in fact, the global coffee market is about over $200 billion. That's bigger than the GDP of Kenya or even the GDP of Ethiopia. Now we can say coffee has grown into this huge ecosystem, and is a concept, an idea at this point that has changed so many areas of human existence. And that's, of course, culture and politics and economy over the years. Maybe you can say maybe 500 years or even longer than that. Now, yeah, while other nations have impacted the global culture and economy and politics, mostly they've done that through force. We speak English today in most part of Africa because the Europeans came and colonized this place, and of course they left behind many of their cultures and of course political structure and things like that. Ethiopia has influence all over the world, but it didn't go to these parts and colonized or forced people to take in their culture. It just spread. So we can say Ethiopia changed the world through the berry. Those are my random thoughts.